Welcome to a tutorial on Bootstrap. In this video, I'm going to talk about cards. Cards are a flexible content container within Bootstrap. Similar to how we use other components and content areas, we can add content to it, define how we want to define different areas within this, as well as apply different colors and other organizational means. So to start, let's talk about what a card is. So coming down here on line 15, we see the first use of the class card. This defines an element as acting as a card, and we see that over here. Within a card is a card header, and we see right here, card header. So we have a card and it has a header. Similar to when we were using alerts and alert headers in previous videos, we can define these content areas, a card, and define areas within that content using its prefix, in this case, card-something. So we have a card, we're defining some content area as a card, then card-header to define some sub-area of that as the header of the card. So we have class equals card, then class equals card header within that. So we're defining a header for our card. Moving down, starting here on line 21, we see we can expand that even more. We have class equals card to define this content area, and then we have card header to define its header, and card body to define its body. Again, using that prefix of card. Card header, card body. And we see right over here, card header, card body. And notice these are flexible. If I extend this, they also fill up this space. So it allows us this flexibility of design to define these content area as cards. Coming down here to footer, we also see the similar idea as we discussed. Card, card header, card body, card footer, in the same way across these. So first we define an initial element as using the class card to define this certain area as a card. And then within that, again, we can subdivide it using this prefix, a header, a body, and a footer. And we see that down here in footer, a header, a body, and a footer. So we can define these three areas within a card. First we define the card, then within that we define header and a body and a footer. Similar to how we were using alerts in a previous video. So we can also define card colors, and this follows the much earlier video on borders and colors, part 1 of this series, when we talked about how we can apply the existing Bootstrap categories of colors to different elements by using their names. So we see that same idea resurfacing right here. Notice again we're using a card class. This time we're using text white and BG, which stands for background primary for the primary color category. And we see that down here, header and card body. So card, text white, background primary. We see these are very common uses of mixing in other color categories, color classes, to an existing components or areas, and we can bring all of these concepts together to build complex sites that follow the same organizational and layout rules that we've established. We can use existing colors, existing text colors, background colors in these two categories, and apply them to existing components to stylize them the way we want. And we see those right here. So we have card, again, card, text white, background primary, and we have all these colors listed: primary, secondary, success, danger, warning, info, similar to what we've seen when we were using borders, we were using alerts, and we were using other things to subdivide this. Again, follows the same scheme across all of Bootstrap. These are the categories we can define, primary and secondary, as well as the text colors using the text prefix. We apply those to a class, we get the text colors we want, the color categories we want, and we're applying these to now a new component to allow us to stylize these content areas. So we see card colors follow the same scheme we reviewed in previous videos when using other components. Scrolling down then, we see there are two different ways that we can organize cards. We can follow the existing grid system that Bootstrap gives us, and notice right here we've done that. This is a new row right here on line 97. I've defined a new column 12 to define this right here for a title. Then within this I've defined column 6, and down here column 6. As we remember, when we use the grid system within Bootstrap, there are 12 columns to a row. So whenever we use numbers lower than 12, they will divide themselves up evenly across that row and take up the space. So if we use 6 and 6, both of which are half of 12, we can have things evenly matched evenly matched side by side on a page, 2 vertical columns of content. So we can use the existing grid system to create card grids using this. And we see here we have card body and card header defined within card. And we see those right over here. Within card grids, its header and its text, its header and its text. And if I expand this, they fill those out and fill up all available space within the bounds that we set. So we can use the existing grid system to make our own cards and add them to our pages in this way. We can also create decks, which are unique to cards. So scrolling down here, we see we define a card deck using the card deck class. Then we define cards within a card. Then we define cards within that deck, which makes sense. When we think of the metaphor of having a deck of cards, the deck has the cards. So we define initial card deck. Then within this, we define individual cards. Notice right here, line 131 is a card, starting on line 137, and on line 143. Now, when we use cards within a deck, they stack themselves vertically left to right. And we'll see that in practice. If I scroll down right here, given more space, they are 3 vertical columns. If we reduce that space, they stack down horizontally. So they follow the rules of other grid systems, similar to up here, but they work on the smaller or mobile grid system layout. Given enough space, they fill vertically. When that space is reduced, they reduce down to horizontal. So we don't even have to mess with the more advanced grid system. We can use the card deck to handle all of that for us. And this is the way we'd want to do it anyway. On a larger resolution size, they'd be vertical. On a smaller resolution size, they'd be horizontal. And that's the performance we'd want, and card decks allow us to do that here. So again, we're using a card deck. We define that initial class. Notice it encapsulates all of these. And then within those, we define cards. And within the cards, we can define headers and bodies and footers if we want, and other information within those. So we see here card deck, then cards, card header, card body, each one within cards, all of those cards within a card deck. So, in this video, I've discussed using cards. Cards are a flexible component within Bootstrap. It's a flexible content area. It gives us the ability to define content in a certain way while knowing how it's going to work in a responsive layout, and allows us to apply certain colors and borders and other information to this component. As I discussed, when we use the card class, we are defining something as a card. Within those, we can define card's header, card body, and card footer using the card prefix, similar to what we saw with other components, especially with alert, where it was alert hyphen something. In these cases, it's card hyphen header, card hyphen body, card hyphen footer within the card class. Then I also reviewed how we can bring in the information from the previous video on colors to define a background primary, text white, to talk about the text colors, talk about the background colors, and use the existing layout options to enhance these components and bring all of our layout within a unified style. Finally, I talked about the 2 different ways we can organize cards. We can do card grids using the grid system that exists within Bootstrap, following the column, rows, and column setup that we know from previous videos and from using Bootstrap. And then I discussed how we can use card decks, which is a new way of working with cards within their own organizational scheme. In this case, we define a card deck, and then we just define the cards within those. And they work, as I showed, either spreading out vertically if there's more space within the resolution, or condensing down to horizontal, which is the type of layout we'd want anyway, when there's not as much resolution space. Thanks for watching.